Hey, everybody, it's your main man, Anthony Brogdon on the 1 and 2s. I got a good looking lady on the channel today. I'm excited that she has come on because she and I have talked a few times. And let me tell you something, I am really excited she's on the channel. This lady knows what she's talking about. She's an expert. She's good. And your mind is gonna be blown away with what she's gonna share today on civil rights and Black history and who she is and that kind of thing, and why she loves this. If we had a love button, you would hit the love button on this video, but all we got is a like button, so I know I got your attention. I'm Anthony Brogdon. I'm the guy that, let me tell you something. She just asked me, she said, well, why you come up with this? And I'll tell you all, as you all know, who've been watching me, I got this documentary out, I got this book, and I'll tell you about it in just a second. But it has become my mission to find people like this lady somehow and ask them to come on the show and to share their knowledge, one topic at a time, 2 topics, what have you, on Black history. Is my way of trying to keep this story alive and let you hear it. So when you, as we prepare to go back to schools in the fall and whatnot, share it with them students in them classrooms from all grades. You can move the cursor wherever you want to start so that you can hear these amazing stories. Hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. I probably put 3, 4, 5 videos up a week, and hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. And I'll just be perfectly honest with you. I don't want to be defined to saying I'm gonna do a certain day. It hits my heart. I put some up at 2 in the morning. Couldn't sleep, thinking about you, my friends, my viewers, and said, I got a video that I want to share with you right now. And I was surprised. I got a couple of dings of people who said, hey, I'm watching this right now at 2 a.m. That's what we do here. I give it to you straight, no chaser. I want these people to intoxicate your mind. We'll put a lemon, a lime, ice cubes, whatever it takes, so that you walk away staggering, not DUI and all that. And I'm speaking it hypothetically, but staggering with what you have learned here on Strong Inspirations. Did you watch the video where the lady said that there was a Black guy in Florida, Harry T. Moore, who said, I don't care what them white people think about me. I'm going to keep signing up these NAACP chapters. I'm going to keep registering people to vote. They got so mad at him, they blew him up in his house. It's a museum.
On Christmas Day?
That video's on channel.
They blew him up on Christmas Day, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Did you watch the video of the guy, of the lady who, and she studies Black love, and she talked about what Black women have gone through since Africa and the brutality, because they're so gorgeous, so gorgeous that if they wasn't gorgeous, they wouldn't do it, because they're so gorgeous. All of what they've gone throughout history. Watch that video with Dr. Diane Stewart. Did you see the video? And I got 2 of them up. I find them all over America. Out of New Mexico. You know what happened was when them Black folks got to New Mexico, the government gave them land called homestead. Said y'all can have them 5 acres over there, and then however many acres it was, and then you got so many years to do some things, to renovate it, so on and so forth. And then, you know how they do, they tried to trick them and say y'all didn't do enough and we want the land back. Watch that video. There are 2 of them on there. How about this one? Did you watch the video I got of the 2 or 3-time great-granddaughters of a Black guy who was enslaved? My man was working with the metals and stuff, did training in the metals, got good at it, and ended up owning a car manufacturing company in 1905 and was competing against Henry Ford. And I'm sure he was beating him in some ways. He just didn't have the money to survive it, and so on and so forth. But watch, I got his great granddaughters on the channel. Watch that video. So we over 350 strong, and we coming at you often. And this video is just another example. Now, what I like for you to do on my own personal tip, this is my commercial, everybody. It's commercial time. I did this documentary on the rise of Black business in America. It took me 2 years to chronicle slaves who owned businesses, and they used the profits to buy their freedom. I list them in this business. I got names in here I know you don't know. I don't know. Let me tell you something. I was a decent student in grade school. I slept on that when they talked about slaves owning business, because that would have blew my mind. Something happened. I never heard that till I stumbled upon it. And then I put it in this documentary, which I took to over 40 cities across the country. It's streaming on Amazon. People like this so much, I went one step further and I wrote this book. It's called Black Business Book. Somebody said, and I believe them, and I got some verifiers, it's the #1 Black history book, Black business history book on the market. It is flying off of the shelves, off my basement. It's not flying out my basement. Get you a copy of Black Business Book. It's just like the documentary, but more thorough. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not no big reader, so it's not a big book. I give you the fact and let the fact stand on its own merit. And if you want to learn more, you just go to the reference section to where I found it. I want the facts to, oh man, this right here is it. All the way slaves gained their freedom. And did you know some sued for it and won? It's in this book. So get you a copy of my book, Black Business Book. Do it today. It's very reasonably priced, because I want a lot of people to learn this, and I don't want the price to stop them. I don't say what the price is, but you're going to be amazed, and you can buy more than one. Trust me. And so that's what I'm doing here. Good things are happening. And you know that I like this term and this word strong. It's my favorite word. I wish my middle name was Strong. I've been saying strong a long time. Strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And everybody, that is my introduction to my guest today. She's a strong lady. Come on, introduce yourself. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Francoise Hamlin. I am an associate professor at Brown University in Africana Studies and History. I'm originally from England. As you can tell, I've been in the US now most of my life, so the accent's still here, but I've been here all of my adult life.
Yeah. Okay, let me stop you there, because you said, okay. I don't mean no disrespect, but yeah, as you might know, with my guests, I do ask them some questions about them. And you alluded to it that you're from England. Are you from London? What city in England were you?
I'm from London, but I'm a child of the British Empire. So my parents are immigrants from the Empire, right? My father was from Trinidad and my mother was from Mauritius, which is in the Indian Ocean. So I am a child of the British Empire, but I was born and raised in London and moved out here to do grad school and stayed.
Okay, let me ask you this. Did your parents move back to London when they started asking people from Trinidad and Islands to come back home and to take those jobs to help out, that kind of thing? Was that the motivation?
Yeah. In the 60s, well, the Windrush generation is what is mostly, my parents were definitely on the end of the Windrush generation, coming in at the after World War II when the country needed rebuilding. But certain people didn't want to do certain jobs, so they brought people of color from the colonies who were automatically citizens because they were part of the empire to come in and do work. So both of my parents trained as nurses.
Oh, really? So, okay, do you remember hearing stories of the riots when they got there and then the other people getting mad at them for being there and the discrimination that they faced?
Yeah, it's the same as what happens here with immigrants, right? Immigrants are coming here doing the jobs that other people don't want to do, and yet get all of the sort of the hatred and accusations of taking jobs, but those were jobs that no one wanted to do.
Yeah. So did your parents ever face anything? Did you ever hear somebody call them names and do something?
I mean, in the neighborhood we lived in, on our street, we were the only Black family, and I know,
Really?
and I know that they faced a lot of discrimination, and they also I had a sister, they protected the two of us. So as adults, we got to hear some of these stories, but oh yeah, there was definitely, I mean, it was a different time too. So
Sure.
I still remember riding my bike up and down the street and feeling very safe. It was a different time, but yeah, they faced a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Okay. In the neighborhood you grew up, was it like you said, you predominantly a white community. Did you have Black friends? Were you able to find your Blackness in that regard?
No, I found my Blackness coming to the US.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I did have friends of color, but the race in England is very different. So the numbers are a lot less, the ratio is a lot less than it is here. And so there are more Asians in the UK, so more Indian, Pakistani, Bangladesh, and they're all empire, right? It's all part of the empire. Than sort of Afro-Caribbeans in sort of my area where I was growing up. A lot's changed in the 30 years since I've been there, but yes, there was. So in school I was one of few.
Really?
Yeah. So most of my and the friends I was the people of color I was friends with were Southeast Asian mostly, just because of who was there. But yeah, it's sort of my Blackness sort of, I started to think about that more vividly when I did an exchange program in Clarksdale, Mississippi after high school in England.
Oh, really?
That's changed my life. That's why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
That changed
Let me ask you this, and I say this because it can happen here in Michigan. I'm in Detroit, everybody. And if a student grows up in a predominantly white neighborhood, they lose who they are and they become they become less sympathetic or what have you to our plight. Could that have happened to you, or did your parents tell you something that, hey, let me tell you, no matter what you see around here and how you like this, so on and so forth, that you're still Black or something like that? How did you?
I mean, we were definitely, my parents didn't give us any leeway when it came to school. Like, it's like you're gonna get A's because you have to be twice as good to get anything. So that was definitely part of the dialogue, and sort of that was their expectation is that we were straight A students. A- didn't cut it. And and they did everything that they could to give us that education, but always reminding us that we had to be twice as good. But part of that was like we didn't have a choice, right? I mean, there were less distractions those days, no social media, no personal, so so that was what we did, and that's how we were raised. So they were only able to go a certain level. I mean, they did nursing school and were able to have a career in nursing in England. But they wanted more for us.
Were they held back being Black at a certain level of nursing where you saying my dad, my mom, they really good, and they're not going to go no further than such
I think so. I think they probably were sort of passed over for promotion, and the slights that we all get, that hard to prove, but you all know, So I'm sure they we don't talk about it as much because I think they're of the generation that don't like to talk backwards. They want everything to be sort of positive and moving forward.
I love it.
And so that's, I get every once in a while, I'll get a story from my mom, and I'm like, oh, okay. But I know, I mean, now being a historian and being a scholar and reading so much, you know that, okay, if it was happening around, it must have happened to them. Yeah, for sure.
Is there we're going to just a little bit longer because I like this. Is there growing up, did you see Black people though? Did you go to what was the Black neighborhood, and were you able to go over there and kind of hang out a little bit?
You know what? Segregation, things are different in England, very different. So I lived in a very sort of predominantly white area of London and that's where I grew up, and that was my frame of reference. There were other areas that had more of a Afro-Caribbean presence or an African presence. And we would go visit those places to get food, right? To get food items.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
but and we had, you know, both parents had other family members and friends who had also migrated over. So we knew them, and they were our godparents, you know, so there were people around,
I
but they
love it.
lived in our neighborhood, and
Yeah.
none of them had kids our age. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I got you. I got you. Did you ever go back to his homeland or to her homeland and do some of that research and understand who they were?
Well, well, yeah. I mean, we both have. I visited both points of origin, but you know, I'm English. I was born and raised there. So I go there, and it's interesting because you can see people who look like me, especially in Mauritius, right? Because but it's really interesting to go and see where they came from and understand them better, and sort of that, and sort of like me doing African American history and focusing on that, but thinking about the diaspora at large.
Sure.
And I say I come from the diaspora, not the American you know, not from the US, but I come from the Black diaspora, and these stories are universal in many ways, right? And it's all about labor. It's all about exploitation of labor.
Sure. Well, now, you said Marissa. I'm not pronouncing that right. Where is that?
It's in the Indian Ocean. It's right off the coast of Madagascar. It's a tiny little island, but it was called the Key of the Indian Ocean because ships were coming in from the Horn of Africa or from the other direction through past Asia. You have to pass Mauritius. So it became one of those points like Guam, right? In terms of like a prime territory for the colonies, because they can control that, they can control the shipping literally into the Indian Ocean. So it's a tiny little volcanic island, and it was held by the Dutch, the French, and then the British. It got independence in, I think, 1968.
How did Black people get there? As they were slaves and then never just went further, that kind of thing, or what?
Well, the indigenous folks would be people of color. I mean, it's part of the African continent. But if you go there now, there are a lot of Indian, Chinese, and African in terms of, so it's become this Creole mix of people, and it's totally reflected in my family.
I got you.
So there's all different colors and colors and food and cultures in on this tiny little island. It's a beautiful island. It's kind of like, a lot of Brits go there for their honeymoon. It's like the Hawaii kind of.
Really? Yeah. Okay, I got you. Is there, let me ask you this question. Is there, besides Africa and besides America, and maybe besides the Caribbean even, is there some place that Black people don't know that Black people rule, that's a beautiful place? They've been ruling it since the transatlantic slave, like maybe that spot, or can you think of a spot like that?
I mean, Hawaii. I mean, a lot of folks don't realize that Hawaii, before America took it, were run by Black kings and queens.
Oh, really?
And you go to Oahu, and there are, I mean, I went there recently for a conference.
Yeah.
And there's the little palace, and there's all the histories in there, and you see these portraits, and they're Black people, they're Black folk.
Really?
But yeah, that's part of US history now.
Sure.
And imperialism, right? Like, there's no reason why, anyway, I want to go, there's no reason why we need those places in the Pacific. But if you go there, you see the history that was destroyed, those kind of traditions that are there. So yeah, I think a lot of Americans don't even know that, and that's their own country.
Yeah, right. I didn't know it, to be honest with you. And I've tried to reach out to some people there to have them come on the show and tell that. And everybody, I'm gonna do it too. I'm gonna do that. That's gonna happen. So now all this led you to come to America, and then how did you pick civil rights as, I guess, one of your focal points of study?
It's a long I always say God has a sense of humor, and my story is definitely that. I did history in school, where we actually did history. And I did a lot on the US. I have aunts who lived in the US from my father's side. They, he came to England, they came to the US. And so I had visited the US a couple of times. So once I finished A levels, which is our system of qualifying for university, I'd gotten a place to study law at university. Law was always my track, right? Was what I was going to do. So I got a place to study law.
To be a lawyer.
To be a barrister in England.
Barrister, yes.
My goal was to be one of the first Black women barristers in the country.
Really? Because they hadn't had one, and you're not that old.
No, this would have been in the 90s, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there is one or two now, but I would have been, if I had continued on that track, that would have been my future. But I decided after A levels that I wanted to take a year off, like they call it gap year in England,
sure.
Before you go to university. So
Sure.
I applied to an exchange program, and they accepted me, and they placed me in Mississippi.
Wow, that had to blow your mind.
Oh yeah. Because I'm from London, right? And so you're asked what your preference is, and I was like, New York, San Francisco, give me another urban area.
Sure.
That I'm used to, because London's a huge city, so there are very few comparable cities like that.
Sure.
And they put me in Mississippi, and once I got there, they said, and this was an American company, they said, because we thought you'd feel at home there, because I'm Black. Yeah. Apparently,
sure,
and I'm like, okay, I literally came from a convent school, right? An all-girls convent school in the middle of London.
Wow.
Ended up literally in a cotton field in Mississippi, right?
Wow.
Clarksdale, Mississippi. So I did a high school year in there. Totally complete. I mean, you can't talk about culture shock. I mean,
sure.
But that was the space in where I kind of realized, I know I'm Black. I know that, but the people around me are Black, but they don't treating me like I'm one of them, right? The language barrier is real. Like I had my accent was stronger then.
Yeah.
And rural Mississippi, that's a very strong accent.
Yeah, sure.
So it took a while.
Sure.
I stayed with this amazing African-American woman who was my host mom, who was totally abused by the system because she was meant to get a stipend every month to look after me. She never got any money. I didn't know any of this until later.
Really?
A Christian woman, and she opened up her home to me, and she passed away, in 2007. But yeah, I she's my mom. She's my mom. But I did high school, and literally this year we're celebrating our 30th high school reunion next month in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And at that point, I wasn't thinking about civil rights. I was just thinking, whoa, this is really weird. This is not the America I knew, right? Think about what America exports, the image of America it exports. It's the urban image, it's the culture, it's sort of music and film and all that, but they don't export the image of Mississippi or of real life of people struggling, right? So I was like, this is really weird. So literally, part of it is sort of teenage gumption, because I don't know if I would to do that risk now. I gave up my degree position to do law, gave it up, and reapplied to university to do American studies, US studies in England. And I ended up, because of my grades and because of where I was already in the US, I ended up in one of the best places in the UK to do it. And that started me on the journey. So my undergraduate degree is in US studies. And from then, it's a 4-year program, and your third year, you go abroad to another institution in the US.
Sure.
And I ended up at George Washington for a year.
Okay.
Washington University in DC. And for the first time, I had Black professors. And ever.
Because you didn't have them in England at all. Yeah.
And a couple of them were like, you need to do a PhD. We need you in the academy. You need to do it. So that started, and I was like, PhD. I never thought about it.
Sure.
I would more like go with the flow.
Sure.
Like I said to you before, school had always been something I did. So that was like what I did. So I just kept going without a plan. but I went back, and then I decided to apply for PhD program.
Sure.
At that point, I was really interested in literature. So all of my degrees are interdisciplinary, right? They're American studies or African American studies, or both, my PhD is a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
And so literature was the thing I was doing and was really interested in. So Black literature, Harlem Renaissance literature, I loved it. So I applied many places, but at Yale, which is where I ended up doing my PhD, Hazel Cobby was there, and she's another British transplant, right? She trained in England under Stuart Hall, her and Paul Gilroy, kind of this powerhouse, sort of thinking about Black British culture, and she's a feminist. So at Yale, she saw something in my application, and so I ended up at Yale to work with her. And again, God has a sense of humor. A lot of these things, like, I always tell my students, be aware of the people around you who are helping you, because you never know who your mentors will be. Right?
Sure.
So I had white men in the UK mentoring me, pushing me along, because they saw something, and it was in their, so I tell students, don't rule anyone out, right? Because you never know. Everyone has their own reasons for doing things.
Sure.
But your blessings can come from anywhere,
right? Right.
So I ended up at Yale, and then I was in a class with Professor Glenda Gilmore, who's a famed historian. At that point, her book was blowing up, Gender and Jim Crow, and I said, history's really cool. And history was the thing in high school when I was in England that got me into thinking about the US in the first place. But then the literature kicked in. And then, so one of the assignments was it was over the spring semester, so we had spring break, do a project over spring break and write it up. And that was the assignment for the class.
Okay.
And I was like, I already have this trip planned to Mississippi to visit my host.
Sure.
So I did that. I went down to Mississippi and started interviewing folks, just out of, I'm like, okay, I need to come up with a project.
Yes.
And I realized then that the history of the civil rights in Clarksdale wasn't really known. Like, no one had written about it. So much is written about civil rights in Mississippi, but nothing about Clarksdale.
Let me stop you there. And I mean no disrespect in this, and we're going to stay on that for sure. But did you notice, or what is the difference between Black people in Mississippi and Black people in London? Because Black people in Mississippi, let's say not all of them, but some of them could be complacent with the system. Are Black people in London complacent with the system in a similar way, or?
It's different.
Okay.
It's different. I mean, London's a huge metropolitan city, so I think the comparison would be urban and rural.
Yeah.
I think folks in Mississippi, like the people I was around, they didn't travel. That wasn't something on their radar to travel.
Sure.
Most of my friends at the point where I was in high school had never gone on a plane, ever.
Sure.
Right? We were 80 miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. And so going to Memphis was the thing that the folks did.
Okay.
So that kind of, it's not insular, and it's not even on purpose. It's just the culture.
Yeah, sure.
Very home, people stayed, people found community and stayed there, right? And because consumed culture from the outside in, but didn't really explore themselves. A lot of, like, again, the industry and the jobs in Mississippi are so poor that there isn't money, right? I mean, the Mississippi is the 50th in most things. It's 50 for a reason, right?
Right.
So folks didn't understand me. They're like, how could you leave your mama in England and come here? Why are you here? I mean, why aren't you?
Sure.
They couldn't understand my experience because they had never seen it before. These are Black and white, and everyone in that town, right?
Sure.
So I was a little bit of a novelty. It was weird, but so that's what I would say was the difference. So my peers, the folks I was in class with, it was difficult for me to fit in because they didn't understand me at all. So they kind of held me at arm's length. And I totally understand it. We were teenagers. At the time, it was painful, but now in hindsight.
Yeah.
But
let me stop you there. I think the point I'm getting at is in urban cities in America, specifically northern cities, I would say, and I don't mean no disrespect to those who don't live in them, Black people have a little more, we're not afraid of white people attitude. We're going to go get it. We're equal footing. Maybe in Mississippi, they don't have that. Do they have that in London? Like, we're going to get it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again,
okay, so you okay. That's what I'm driving at.
I mean, look, they have the Black Lives Matter movement. I mean,
I got you.
There are problems.
Yeah.
But and remember, the England I know is the England of a child, because I haven't been there as an adult.
Yeah, sure.
There's totally discrimination. A lot of it is this kind of under the radar discrimination.
Yeah, right.
Like people won't go out and call you the N-word, but they will stop you from getting promoted, kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that happens, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Look at it this way. I mean, a good frame of reference that Americans would know. Look how they've treated Meghan Markle.
Right. Okay, I got you.
For us in the UK, we're like, yeah, of course. I mean,
I got you. Yeah, I got you. I wanted to ask me for that. So now you get to this a love of Black history and civil rights. What, you wrote a book, or what? Yeah. Tell us that story of what it is.
It's called Crossroads at Clarksdale, and basically it's the civil rights movement in Clarksdale, Mississippi. And it kind of talks about how local people created a movement and sustained a movement given the amount of pressure they faced as being in Mississippi. Because again, you talked about freedoms. In Mississippi, folks were scared because they had every reason to be. They had no protection, right? Okay. No protection. People went missing and never turned up. There was no recourse. The police were not on their side. Usually the police were doing that. And they had little to no voice. However, there were people who organized. There were people who organized, created systems, created, used the resources they had, right? To particularly the churches, the spaces. I write about women and how they organized because they were able to fly under the radar because they're not considered leaders, right? We're talking about the 50s and 60s. Women aren't considered leaders.
Okay.
So another thing I write about is the women in the movement who are everyday people. So I write about this woman, Vera Piggy, who's a beautician. And because she's a beautician, she's not employed by white folks. Her building isn't leased by white folks. So she has a level of independence to organize because she is not under the threat of being unemployed and unemployable. She works with Aaron Henry, who's a pharmacist. Again, a level of independence because he's a business owner, right? Unlike ministers ministers like King and the cohort under SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Council, because they ran huge churches or bigger churches that could actually give them a salary. Churches in Mississippi were so small and their congregants were so poor, folks didn't really get a salary out of ministering and pastoring. So they had outside jobs. So they were beholden to their employers. So you don't see the same level of interaction with ministers and churches as you do with King. So the King narrative is true, but it didn't happen the same way in Mississippi and in other places, in a lot of the rural South, because things were different. So my story kind of shows how, there are many movements. It's not just one civil rights movement. I call it a mass of movements.
Okay.
Local area, that group of people organize themselves, use the resources. So the NAACP is the organization that really kind of took root in Clarksdale early in the 50s. So by the time the SNCC students and the core students come in the 60s, and that's when people think the movement in Mississippi is to happen, but it didn't. It happened with all these local people earlier. They come in, and use the foundation that that the older folks had created to do the work that they were able to do. In Clarksdale, the NAACP was so strong because of Erin Henry and Vera Piggy, they didn't get as much. So you don't hear as much about Clarksdale because those younger people didn't really come in that much.
Okay.
So that explains the history and the gap in the history.
Okay.
So my book kind of talks about how movements happen, right? It's local grassroots people organizing around issues that they need in their town at that moment. And it shifts over time.
Yeah.
And part of it is, as a teacher, a lot of young people think, oh, we can never have a civil rights movement. People aren't united. People aren't working together. And my research shows that no one did. Even back in the day, people were fighting all the time.
Sure.
But issues weren't universal. The methods for reaching goals that might have been similar were different.
Sure.
So it's not, it's to say, don't wait for what you think was real.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, right?
Let me stop you there. Let me ask you this question. So can you cite a fight that they did to accomplish some goal and how they did it, and maybe did they achieve that goal? If it wasn't just saying I'm going into that grocery store, you pick the goal. Can you cite one of those?
One of the things, so there was a parade. Every town had their little Christmas parade where high school bands would, parade down the street. They would have the white schools, and then they would allow the Black students to have their parade. In '62, the city said, no Black folk, because you're doing all this organizing, making all this mess. No. And
you cannot have a parade.
Cannot have a parade. And of course, what that actually does is galvanize the parents in a way that they might not have done so before because they were worried about the safety of their children.
Yeah.
Now everyone was mad, right? It's not just, because let's face it, civil rights and this kind of activism is not the entire community. It's only a few people who are doing this, right?
No, hold on, let me stop it. Doing what? Fighting for civil rights or holding the people back? What do you mean?
Well, fighting for civil rights. They're only the people who have least to lose.
Yeah, right.
Are doing, are kind of pushing people to do voter registration. It's only a handful of people doing it.
I got you.
Right? Because the risks are so, this is Mississippi, the risks.
I got you. Yeah, right. I've never been to Mississippi.
Well, Mississippi, Alabama, any of those.
Sure.
So the minute you attack the kids, you're actually enraging more people, right? So they start getting involved. And so the NAACP jumps on it and plans a boycott for Christmas. So this happens around the Thanksgiving parade, right? So at the end of November, they boycott downtown for Christmas. Now this is main commercial time for these stores.
Right.
That it's a successful boycott, right? And they create carpools to go to Memphis for shopping or other towns for folks to shop.
Okay, I love it.
Yeah, and what the town does, it arrests all the leaders.
Oh, really?
It arrests all the leaders, saying that they are breaking the law by inciting, by saying that boycotts are illegal, right? And the folks are like, fine us, whatever. We're not stopping anything. So that's what happens. So what happens is so the kids are allowed to march eventually, but what it does do, it opens up the movement, right, and organizing. It becomes a tool for organizing because now they have the ear of all of these people, so it expands. In terms of a real sort of hard, the thing is, right, when we think about success, it's always relative. Because folks think that the civil rights movement was successful. They got all of the sort of the laws in place, right?
Sure.
But look where we are now. So success is relative. So before, while the freedom rides were happening in 1961 and 62 all over the South, all over the country, they were also happening in Clarksdale. You don't hear about it as much because it wasn't the usual crew of people. But you had local people. Vera Piggy and her daughter desegregated the local railroad station, the waiting rooms. They were arrested. It's written up in the paper, this tiny little, the local paper. So all that research has to be done because they're not in the New York Times, right? They're not being loud by, the papers that SNCC have are very rich and everything because they were young people created them.
Right.
NAACP, their papers are less rich because it was so dangerous to be a member. People didn't put their names on anything.
Oh man.
So doing the research was really difficult because you had to start recognizing handwriting. So it took a lot more time. Sure. But it also made it richer, right? Because I was able to create something. And also it's not just the story about Clarksdale, but it's how you tell the story. The book is meant to think about this history beyond Clarksdale, right? Like there are local stories everywhere.
Sure.
Well, local stories matter. And so for me, that was the impetus. That's what I teach the students. It's like, yes, you can learn the specifics about Clarksdale, but the bigger stories about how women organize, using beauty shops, using childcare centers, using, those spaces that aren't considered political, right? Because women aren't considered political in those days, to do organizing work, because the white citizens councils were looking at the barbershop. They were looking at the churches because they knew to look at these places because men usually dominate.
Right.
But these women were doing the work, right?
I love it.
Vera Piggy went and learned how to run citizenship classes. So she would come back to Clarksdale and teach other people, other women, how to teach folks to read and write so that they could pass the voter registration.
I love it. I love it.
All underground. And so those kind of like tools to think about activism, to find organizing, is what I tried to do in this book. And I did a lot of oral histories. I was fortunate that this project happened at a moment where there were a lot of people still alive. Like most of the people I interviewed for this book are now passed.
Yeah, sure.
There was a timeline for this, and there's a lot of writing around the time that my book came out in 2012, and there are a few more other books, local histories, that do something similar, in different parts of the country. But together, they all really kind of think about local history and how it's important to understand that when thinking about organizing a town.
Let me interrupt you there. Yeah. Do you identify? Is there one, the mayor or the sheriff, the white person who was really the one that was the Bull Connor of that town, that did all he could to hold Black people back?
Yeah, I mean, Billy, gosh, I can't remember, why am I blanking on his name? The sheriff was literally, used to puff up when anyone called him Bull Connor.
Oh, they did call him that?
Oh yeah, they called him that.
I just said that off the cuff. I didn't just use that as an example.
He was very proud of that analogy. And so he would do the dirty work of the citizens councils, who were the judges, the bank managers, the mayor, the finance, the folks behind the scenes. They were the ones actually running the city. And the police chief, were doing all their dirty work, right? One thing I uncover, and I wrote a separate article, didn't make the book. I mean, it's in the book, but it didn't dominate the book, is there was a white student volunteer, who came to Mississippi, came to Clarksdale undercover to sort of open up the white citizens, to figure out where the power was in Clarksdale. So he went undercover and infiltrated all of these spaces. And that's why we know who actually was running all of this in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
But at the time, folks didn't quite know. I mean, people knew who the honchos were, but didn't really know the extent of how these people operate, which is why now, as a historian, having done that work, I can totally see the parallels to what we're seeing, right? Where the power really lies isn't necessarily with the president, but it's with the advisors, with the So
can you identify have been able maybe some white people who were sympathizers?
Yeah,
in the churches and that kind of thing too.
Well, churches were the most segregated spaces still, right?
Yeah.
So not necessarily churches, but what you do see in Mississippi and in these places, that it was really hard to be a moderate white person, because like it is now, because you were punished by the Citizens Council for not following the party line. So again, you'd have folks who weren't necessarily on board with segregation and what have you, but were able to use their privilege and continue their lives, but didn't necessarily make it difficult for the people around them, right? So my host mother, who was in Clarksdale through this whole time, she worked as a domestic in people's homes. So when I asked her about all of this stuff, she was like, I was fine. People treated me well. I mean, I knew about what was going on, but you know, my life was pretty stable and what have you. So most, you know, a lot happened like that.
I got you.
Of course, being fine meant that she still was paid minimum wage. She still relied on hand-me-downs, but she wasn't threatened. Her kids went to a Catholic school, right? Black Catholic school, but it was, there were a few folks who, when the War on Poverty initiatives came out in the 1965, really worked to get some of that federal money into Clarksdale. So worked with Aaron Henry to get some of that money into Clarksdale and to kind of funnel that into. So there was definitely white folks who had the means and had enough protection because of their wealth or their status. Right. That they could fight off the Citizens Councils, and so in that way. Right. But most people were afraid and just like went along with their lives, which which is actually most people in general.
Sure. Right? Let me ask you this: is it what's in Clarksdale? What's the black side of town called? What's the white side of town called? Is it separated by a railroad track? That kind of thing.
Oh yeah. So the black part of town was mostly downtown at that point. Mm-hmm. And there's still you can see it because now a lot of those places are boarded up. But yeah, you can see it when you're there.
Yeah, right.
The Highway 61 used to run through Clarksdale. Now it's bypassed outside of Clarksdale. But that was a divide. There are the railroad tracks also. That's a divide. And then you can see the lines of fields where they used to have fields. Now they've built it up. But geographically, there are black and white neighborhoods for sure. Now you see black folks moving into some of these neighborhoods, and a little bit more mixed. But what you see are the white folks moving out into the county and building out.
I got you. Yeah, that's possible. Is there a black person who, other than the civil rights persons you mentioned, who was a prominent businesswoman who maybe had the funeral home that kind of financed some of the underground things that were going on, and we should know their names or something?
Yeah, the two I mentioned are the two main people, but in the leadership of the local NAACP, you had funeral home operators, at least two of them.
All right.
You did have a couple of ministers who were able to be active, but separate from the churches that they pastored, right?
Right.
And then you had Vera Piggy and Aaron Henry. Those were the main crew.
Right.
And they opened it up so that once the next generation with the poverty programs coming in, anti-poverty programs coming in, there are younger folks who are coming up who are able to get more leadership positions because they were able to go to school because of all the work these older folks had done. Sure. And so you see that coming in. The first Black mayor was Henry Espy, who is sort of related to Mike Espy. So that family is embedded in Clarksdale and Mississippi. So he's the first Black mayor in the, I want to say 90s. But before that, in the late 60s, early 70s, he was on the school board.
Oh, okay.
But only one, right? So there are people who are coming up, who came up through because of the activism and the work that other folks had done ahead of time. But that's how it happens, right? And unfortunately, so many of these people come up and they don't recognize from whence they came.
Oh, okay. I got where you're going on that. Did they have to take down any Confederate monuments in that town?
Listen, it's Mississippi. They didn't get the Confederate flag off the state flag until last year.
Yeah, right.
Oh, no.
No. Okay, I got you. I
No.
got you. Now, do you have a copy of your book there that we can you show us, and let's plug it?
This is one of them. It's Crossroads at Clarksdale. So this is my monograph. And available.
And what is that on the top of the book? That's the highways?
This is the Crossroads. So Clarksdale is known for the home of the blues, right?
Oh, really?
So yeah, this is where, so this Crossroads is where Highway 49 and 61 meet. And so this is the,
okay.
And this is where apparently Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil for, for superior musical skills. So that's the legend of Clarksdale. So they have blues festivals there every year. It's a very touristy place for blues. And so what I was trying to do is say, yeah, blues is great. And absolutely there's a history there, but the blues don't come from nothing. So why is there blues in Clarksdale? And then the sort of the history of racism is why, is sort of the story of the blues, right? And so, the book is doing something different. And of course, the publishers wanted to sell the book, so they put a very, very well-known image, even though it's not, but the book's not about the blues. So people, I was very worried.
Yeah, I got you there.
Down here is Vera Piggy and Aaron Henry. So I
love it. I love it. How do people get copies of your book? You have a website, and it's so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's on Amazon, the University of North Carolina Press website, any bookstore, you can find it.
Yeah. Do you have a website yourself? People can follow you?
Twitter.
Okay, I got you.
I have a Facebook page for this book. I do have a website, but I haven't updated it because I'm not computer savvy. I need to get my son to do it probably. Right. But yeah, it's okay. Twitter's probably the best way right now.
Sure. Okay, I'll put it in the description. Is it? And I guess people have asked you, and maybe have you thought of doing a follow-up to where Clarksdale is today?
Well, I bring the book up to 1999, and I talk about, because what happens is Bill Clinton, when he's president, does a tour of the 5 poorest cities in the country, and he goes to Clarksdale.
Really?
So I end the book there. I'm like, what is success? Why is the president here in 1999, right? So that kind of full circle. Again, one of those bigger questions is, how do we define success when it comes to activism, when we're living in a country that hasn't changed? Hasn't changed at all. I mean, we're seeing it, right? We've just taken a huge leap back 60 years in the past, 5 or 6 years. So that's where I ended the book. I'm not coming to the present means becoming a sociologist.
Yeah, right. How did this shape you? First of all, it's a couple parts to that question. When you first got there, were you afraid?
I was not afraid because I'm a teenager, and we're not, I wasn't afraid of racism because I didn't understand it then. I didn't experience it because I was different. I was treated differently than my friends because I wasn't one of them, right? I mean,
So nobody tried to beat you up for being different, though? Some other, how them girls get in their clique, and then who was this pretty girl over here trying to, all the boys like her?
I was also a black belt in karate, so no one was gonna mess with me.
Okay, I got you there.
But they did. I mean, and I didn't initiate, and I was friends. I wasn't trying to get mad at anyone. But I could definitely tell that I was being held at arm's length, and as an adult, I totally understand it. At the time, it's hard. It's a harder pill to swallow. But no, I didn't feel that. I did feel excluded a lot, but I didn't feel at risk at all. And they probably knew that folks were watching. The teachers were watching out. I was the first and last exchange student to come through Mississippi, come through that town.
Really?
So I think so. Because I go back now for research. I take students back often because I got
you.
Brown and Tougaloo College in Jackson have a partnership that's lasted 55 years.
Okay.
So I take students down annually, of course, COVID a few years, and then I take them through the Delta to look at civil rights sites, and I take them through Clarksdale. Folks still remember me, and I've changed a lot. I'm not 18.
Yeah, sure.
As the exchange student from London.
Yeah,
right?
sure. Wow,
So,
what an experience.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this one more question. This closes out. How did you change them?
I don't know if I did. I think my gift was the book. It's like, you guys don't know your own history.
I got you. I love it. There you go.
So, because when I was there, it was really difficult for me to find folks, like people didn't know their own history. Like I found out grandparents of the people I went to school with were part of the movement. They didn't know that. So I felt like the book was my gift back to the.
I love it. I love it.
It was a full circle moment for me, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. So I do feel it changed me. I love Mississippi. It changed me in a way that it shaped the rest of my life, right? It changed my career.
I got you.
For sure.
Yeah, I got you.
I really want to kind of give that to my students.
The last comment is yours in this regard. In strong is the word resilience. How did you understood the resiliency of the Black people there? That's what you wrote about in your book.
Absolutely. How these folks with everything against them and a history of lynching and violence and suppression and oppression were able to do what they were able to do. Coming out of World War II, right? I think World War II is definitely a catalyst. Aaron Henry was a veteran, right? So he left and got to see, whoa, the world is not Mississippi.
Right.
It was able to bring that back. And Medgar Evers was a veteran. I think the war was really important in terms of bringing some of the outside back into Mississippi, shedding light. And so, yes, these people were resilient. They took risks that I don't think folks are taking now.
Oh, I got you. And
and they took risks not without the gift of hindsight. They didn't know. They thought they might die because before them had died, right? No one had done this before.
Oh, really?
Think about it. Folks turn up missing and dead more often than they actually get to vote. So when you start thinking about, what's at stake for those people at that time in that place, you realize how brave they were and how committed they were to changing the system, even if it meant sacrificing themselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Everybody, that's the last word right there. Boom shakalaka. You ain't, how about this? You can't stop us. You can't stop us. I'm not saying this in this regard. I'm not fleeing from here. This is my land. So either I'm gonna stay here and make this work, and you're gonna have to make it work from me. You're gonna stop your foot on my neck.
This is why the vote is so important, because these people died and were injured and gave up everything so that we could vote. So you have to vote.
There you go.
Everybody
hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. I told you you're gonna like this. Because you hear the big stories, she wrote the small ones. She chronicled the small ones. And it affected her personally. Hit the like button on this video, hit the notifications bell, tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. I'm so happy she came on here. I really didn't know how we were going, where all we were going to go. And she brought it home. She knocked it out the box. She opened up her heart to you, my viewers. Follow her, get her book, tell somebody about her and what she's doing. And I thank you so very much for coming on the show. And to you, I say this with all sincerity, and I mean this. I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. I love that your parents said what they said to you back over in the old country in England, and that you listened. And then you took a chance. I don't know if I could move away in high school. That was maturity. And then you didn't stop it. Yeah, that was maturity. And you had that black belt too. You was kind of ready for the situation. But nonetheless, it opened your eyes. And so everybody, thank you for watching us at Strong Inspirations. With that, I'll say bye-bye, we out.